Excellent. Alrighty, folks. Thank you for your patience. So today's webinar is broken up into 5 sections that you see here today. And we're going to start with what you know, and we'll get to everything throughout the presentation. What I'd like to start with is what genealogy studies, and talk to you a little bit about that. Genealogy studies identity and kinship. And identity is, we're talking about the characteristics and context distinguishing one person from another. So everything that contributes to my personality and my characteristics might be different from yours, and that's perfectly what we want. We need some diversity, of course. And kinship talks about everybody else that kind of influences your circle, influences your life. So that refers to family, connections by blood, marriage, and adoption. Those are self-explanatory. And then it also includes social fiction. So that means everybody else. It could be your neighbor. It could be your classmates if you're in school. Also your clubs that you belong to, your coworkers. So everybody else who is part of your life, who are not blood relatives or married relatives. I took a class about 12 years ago, and the instructor said, there are your relatives, and then there's your kin. Your relatives, of course, is your family, and your kin is everybody else. But I'd like to share with you my definition of genealogy as we get started. I'd like to introduce you to my great-grandmother, Grace Askew, and she is that wonderful-looking lady right there in the lower picture, and with the laser pointer there. She was born in Albany, New York in 1896 and died in Torrance, California in 1992. If that's all I told you, all you would know is that I had a great-grandmother. Her name is Grace Askew, and she lived to be 95 years old. That would not be much of a story. So that's exactly what we want to do. But before I go on, what's really special about this particular photo for me is that it is a 5-generation photo. So let me just quickly point out everybody. So of course, there's my great-grandmother, and there's my grandmother, her daughter, my mom right there in the middle, and here I am in the back right, holding our oldest son, who was about 2 at the time, and he's 31 now and has 2 kids of his own. But we had 5 generations, and that's just a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, or to have. When we do genealogy, we are looking for names, dates, and places. If you are familiar with your family, obviously you know some of that information, and we bet you know more than you think, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But when we are studying genealogy, we also go through stories, photos, memories, family traditions, things like that. And those are the types of things that we want to fill in. And that's what we want to do. So those stories that we create, or that we investigate, and that we find, and that we add to the birth date and the death date, is that dash in between the dates. So my definition is genealogy is that dash in between the dates. So everything in between 1896 and 1992 is Grace's genealogy. Okay. Every good endeavor deserves a good plan, and genealogy is no exception. First, start with what you know. And we think that you probably know more than you think you do. You can probably put together, just off the top of your head, a 3 to 5 generation pedigree just from what you know about your family. So if you start with you, there's 1 generation. If you have children, there's 2 generations. And if you have grandchildren, you already are up to 3. Going back from you, you have then, of course, your parents. There's 4 generations. And even if you just had the names of your grandparents, you don't need to fill in, all names, dates, and places to have this right. But even if you just knew the names of your grandparents, there's 5 generations just from what you know. And then you will start to investigate all of those names, dates, and places to get to your goal. Let me introduce really quickly William Workman. He's the gentleman in the picture. He's the patriarch of the museum here, and he lived from 1799 to 1876. And one of the places that he lived was Puente, California, which is now La Puente, California. So you get started with your basic facts on your family, and then you start gathering more information. You want to look for stories, photographs, letters, diaries, any other family documents that will help you better understand your relatives and the ancestors that you investigate. So what you're going to do is you're going to organize, once you get that stuff collected, you're going to organize and start to write everything down. Probably the most popular thing to do that is a pedigree chart, and I'm going to blow that up for you just a little bit. This is a 4-generation pedigree chart. There are many other formats of these charts, and you can find them online very easily. As you can see, not only are there 4 generations, they're color-coded. If that works for you, that's great. That's you just find whatever works for you. Now, the pedigree chart is most often going to just be able to fill the names, dates, and places that we talked about in our last slide. So it has room for, obviously your name, birth date, and place where you were born, death information for your relatives, and even marriage information, at least a date, maybe a place, and again, depending on the format. It almost looks like a reverse March Madness bracket. It goes from 1 to 64 instead of 64 down to 1. Another thing that you can use are family group sheets. Now, what the difference is with family group sheets is that the format is just for the nuclear family. So you have the parents and the children of that particular nuclear family, and then the information that you're able to put on the family group sheets, it can be a little more detailed. You have more room rather than less room with the pedigree charts to add information to that. So let me pull up the family group sheet that I have. And just to give you an idea, and I hope that's clear enough for you, you have, it looks like Christian, or could be Christian, Hersher, and Anne Marie Obrecht. And they have 7 children, and you see all of the information here. Just by looking at it, you can see that one of the children is not married yet, but it looks like because she's passed away before she ever got married. So here is an example of a family group sheet. You can see the extra information, and you have a lot more room to add things. Now, the goal of this particular system is that once you fill out the family group sheet for the nuclear family, parents and children, then when the children get married and have a family of their own, they get their own family group sheet. So you have generations of family group sheets with overlapping information because you have connected all of these families. So in this case, it looks like Marie, the last child, was very young when she died. So the first 6, of course, would have their own family group sheet. Timelines also help put relatives in historical context. That especially is helpful with photographs. And for instance, if you have a photograph of a family in your family tree, and you know that there were 6 children, but only 5 are in the photograph, perhaps the youngest is not born yet. Or it's possible that maybe the oldest is out on their own and just wasn't there for that particular photograph. So you can kind of gauge the timeline, and you can also use a timeline to put your family in historical context as you're listing historical events, like a war or the virus, the current virus. You could use that in your family research timeline. One last thing to use possibly is research logs. And what those do, those help you prevent multiple searches. I was investigating my paternal grandmother's line, and I found her mother's family in the 1910 census. I saved it to my computer. I gathered whatever information I got out of that, and then I forgot about it. I went and did something else, came back a few weeks later, started working on the same line, and I found the 1910 census. And I go, oh, great, I found something. But no, I already had it. Once I pulled it up and looked, I go, this is just doing double work. So this helps a little bit in your efficiency, as well as keep you from tearing your hair out every time you look at the same thing over and over, even though you've already looked at it. Excuse me a second. You will also have notes and other hard copies of your information. And this is before or even during the time that you have information in a genealogy program, which is the next slide. So what you need to do, though, is create a filing system that works for you. I can't stress that enough, because what works for me doesn't work necessarily for everybody. I have the filing system that has the family members that I have information on in alphabetical order, separate files. So you do know, obviously, the people of the same family, the same surname, are going to be bunched together anyway. So that works pretty good for me. Some people do code it, or I'm sorry, do file it by families. The only thing that you need to do is just keep track of the female line, and we'll handle that in just a couple slides as well. And then some people color code things, just like we saw on the pedigree chart. But again, you need to make it work for you. Organize as you go. As you're collecting things, take careful notes. You may be going through a box of old family documents and you're taking notes on that. Write legibly or type the information, and that way you can obviously read what notes you took. Date any notes or any entries that you do. Avoid using scraps of paper. If you saw my desk, that we're working at home, fortunately, and I've got a couple scraps of paper around that I ultimately had to put on a larger sheet just so I could keep them in one spot. As far as the size of paper, that's up to you, depending on what size you're comfortable with. 8.5 and 11 is the standard, of course, but if you have complete sheets of paper, they're easier to file and more difficult to lose. As far as storing photos and larger objects, I'm going to briefly go over this and then invite you to go back and see one of our other webinars that's online. So you want to store photos in acid-free boxes in a cool, dry place. If you can't afford a lot of the professional grade boxes, by all means, use whatever boxes you can. Store these boxes in a cool, dry place. Attics and basements are neither. They have too many temperature and humidity fluctuations. And just to be on the safe side, put your boxes about a foot above the floor, just in case there's any flooding. For more information on this, I would invite you to go to our YouTube channel and investigate and watch our webinar on photo preservation, and that was done a couple of weeks ago by my colleague Michelle Moreau. So she gives some great information on storing photos and preserving them. Now, ultimately, you're probably going to want to go to electronic files, and these are the genealogy programs that you see online. There are a couple of online programs that are free. Roots Magic is the most familiar one that I know of, but there must be some other ones. Legacy and Family Tree Maker are two of the popular ones that you purchase, but they do have, I think Legacy has a free version. So if you're online, just Google, free genealogy programs or free genealogy software, and hopefully you can find something that'll suit your needs. By all means, if you want to purchase one, and you can download it straight from the web, and it'll load onto your computer, and you're all set. What you want to do with that information, though, after you've started to enter it, is you want to back it up frequently. And fortunately, the folks who create these genealogy programs thought ahead, and they have the capability, these programs, of backing up every time you log off. So it'll probably ask you the first time that you're logging off, do you want to always back up when you log off? And just say yes, and you don't have to worry about it. It is that helpful. As good as that is, you do want to have a separate backup that is that is not loaded onto the computer, just in case your computer crashes. And that's where people use thumb drives or even external hard drives. I'm not sure CDs are large enough anymore, but that's another thing that you might want to investigate if that's something that you're used to using. But these drives, these backup databases, are made to protect that information. So when you are creating these backup databases, you will create what's called a GEDCOM file. It's GEDCOM, and it stands for Genealogy Data Communication. It was developed by members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, better known as the Mormons, and they created this backup system strictly for genealogy files. So in the event that you have a computer crash, but you have your backup files on an external hard drive, all you need to do when your computer's fixed, or if you do have to buy a new computer, just plug in that external hard drive, and you can upload that information as if nothing happened. And it saves you a lot of time, a lot of frustration, and it saves you the fear that you might have lost some information. So that's very helpful to do that, and it's a good idea to do that. Update that one yearly or as needed. I've done some entry where I've entered a lot of information. So not only do I back it up on the computer, but I'll back it up on the thumb drive, because I put a lot of information, and I don't want to lose that. And if worse comes to worse, make print copies as a backup. I know that sounds old school, but you have it in front of you in case, even if those backup databases don't survive for whatever reason. You have your print copies, and yeah, you're going to be doing a lot of data entry, but it's better than not having anything at all. So that's always possible as well. Keep that in mind. Some other tips as you're organizing that you want to keep in mind is always use women's maiden names. That is helpful because if you are searching for a woman with her married name before she got married, you're never going to find her. So that is the main reason why you want to do that. Also, another one that I've been realizing as I'm researching is that sometimes maiden names are hard to come by. So if you find them, you definitely want to preserve that for posterity, and of course for your genealogy. Entering dates is an interesting tip. Enter them in a date, month, year format. So as I have it on the second line to the far left, before JUL for July 2020. Most genealogists I know will do that. Many other people that I know do that in their everyday life. That on a check, for instance, if they write checks. Because if you look at it the way that Americans write the date down, it's much different than Europe and the rest of the world. So we write it 7/4/20, which is in the month, day, year format. But Europe and the rest of the world will switch that around. So you see 4/7/20. And if we were to look at that and not realize that that's a European format, we might look at that as April 7th instead of July 4th. As far as those abbreviations on the third bullet, most genealogy programs do recognize those. So if you were to put ABT, for instance, for about, it will automatically write in about. So if you have a date of birth, for instance, or a year of birth, about 1839, for instance, you would put ABT 1839, and you're done. You don't have to really write it out. But you can.
Question, Steve?
Yes, go ahead.
First, Tracy says hi and says that maiden names are hard to find sometimes. And while she didn't ask this, I'm going to ask this. Do you have any tips on how to find maiden names?
Sure, I have a few ideas. Look for marriage certificates, and they will definitely have the maiden name of the bride. More often than not, though, you will find them in the marriage registration or the marriage license application. That will have that also. Also, when you are searching for where people got married, you can also look at the place where the bride lives. More often than not, couples got married near where the bride lived. A couple of other thoughts is you can look at death certificates. Will often have parental information, so you can find maiden names there. And the last one I'll offer are census reports. Census reports will have them occasionally when an in-law is living with their daughter. So for instance, if my mother-in-law was living with us, me and my wife, and this past April when I filled out the census report, I would put my mother-in-law's name, and then I would add the relationship to me because I was the head of the household. So you could take from that my wife's maiden name. So those are just a few examples, and I do have more, and I can email stuff like that to anybody who would like that. Okay. All right, we're all set to go on. Excellent.
Actually, I have one more question that just.
Sure, go ahead.
Can you repeat the names of the genealogy programs?
Sure. One of them is Legacy, Legacy, and the other one is Family Tree Maker. One thing that I forgot to add about Family Tree Maker is if you have an Ancestry account, you can link those up. So if you add something in your Family Tree Maker program, it'll automatically sync up to your Ancestry and add it there, and vice versa. So that's one nice advantage. And also, since Ancestry loves to talk about the little leaves if they have a clue or a hint, you'll see that on your Family Tree Maker program as well. All right. Alrighty, let's move on. You will also run into roadblocks. It is inevitable. It will happen to everybody. So let's go through a few that are common. So one of them is misspelled names. And often you'll find these in census reports, and most likely the transcription of those census reports. So the folks at the LDS Church who are transcribing these do the best they can when the handwriting from the census taker years ago is kind of faulty. So let me blow this up. This is a 1920 census report from my family, my grandmother's family on my dad's side, and the last name is Roberts. You see that right here. And my great-grandfather's name is actually Luther. All right, when I first found this particular listing, it said Tucker Roberts. And I go, that doesn't sound, I mean, I know it's Luther, but I knew it was them because I saw the rest of the family's names. Okay, third in line there is my Uncle Louis, my grandmother Mary, and then my great aunt Cora, Lucille. Everybody called her Lucille. We called her Aunt Belle. I don't know where the nickname came from, but that's what we called her. Now here's something that kind of answers my question too about, answers the question about finding maiden names. You can't read it very well here, but that is my great-grandmother's sister, Nellie Carlton. And she's living with my grandmother's family. And so you can safely assume that Carlton is the maiden name of my great-grandmother. So there's a great example of that. So misspelled names are sometimes tough to find, but have that in mind because you may see on the census report too, you may start, you'll start to see letters written in the same way, the same handwriting, so you can try to decipher, what the enumerator really meant. Is that an L or is that a T? Okay, so you can do it that way as well. Alrighty, nicknames are another roadblock. Sometimes they're easy to fix. So sometimes your great aunt Betsy's full name is Elizabeth. Betsy is a very common nickname for Elizabeth. You may have date issues. So let's say, for instance, that somebody was born in 1935, for instance, and you find them on the 1940 census. Now, depending on when their birth date is, they may not be 5 yet. So if they were born before April 1st, 1835, they're still going to be 4. They're going to turn 5 before the census report is taken. It is usually April 1st. If they are born later in the year, you'll find that they are still they may be 4 still, because their birthday may be in the fall or in December, something like that. So those are common date issues that you find. And a date that's 1 year off either way is not a big deal. It's within the margin of error. So you just need to find more information to prove that which date is correct. Okay, our next one is very frustrating if you run into it, and that's missing data. So here's an example of the 1890 census. And for those who have a little bit more experience in genealogy, you know that there is not much left of the 1890 census. This is one of 2 pages that survived from Cincinnati, Ohio. All right, you're thinking a large city, in the 1890s, and it was. Unfortunately, when the National Archives were being built in the 1920s, the 1890 census was left in boxes outside of the vault. And of course, there was a fire. So the 1890 census was practically wiped out. There are maybe 12 to 15 states that have fragments, and that's exactly what they're called, 1890 census fragments. And if you are lucky enough to find somebody in your family with 1890 census report, you are the golden child. I've tried, and there's just nothing there. You have maybe 3 or 4 pages of a certain part of town that survives. So that's another thing that happens, and that's unfortunate too. And then even in your personal files, you may have a family member whose birth certificate, for instance, was lost in a church fire when churches kept those records. And then the last one is faulty family stories. And I'd like to go back to my great-grandmother, Grace. As wonderful and sweet a person as she was, she could be ornery sometimes. So, like I said, she was born in November of 1896, and her father worked for a family as a driver. So, in Albany, New York. So the employer wanted to go take his family down to Washington, D.C. and watch the inauguration of President William McKinley. So far, so good. He tells my great-grandfather, yeah, sure, bring your wife and daughter. We'll make a nice trip out of it, and something to remember for the rest of your life. So at that time, inaugurations were in March. So they traveled down there, and as an infant, my great-grandmother was at that particular inauguration. Well, as time went by, her place of birth changed from Albany, New York to Washington, D.C., and the year of her birth changed from 1896 to 1897 because she attended the inauguration in 1897. Well, here comes me, nerdy history great-grandson, trying to convince her that no, she could not have possibly been born in 1897. She would have not even been around yet. No, that's what my mother told me. And that's what, the story just kept on going after that. So here's the 1940 census of my great-grandmother. And again, hopefully it's bigger to you than on my screen, but let me go through it. Here she is. Now let me get the laser. Okay, here, maybe that's not going to work. Here she is on the first line, right under the blue, or right above the blue highlights there. And there she is, Grace Askew. She's the head of the household. And when you kind of move your eye to the right, maybe 4 or 5, 6 spaces or so, the place of birth that she lists is DC. Now, the reason I know that is if you see the X with a circle around it, that is the insignia of the person who gave the information to the census taker. So then below her is my grandmother June, my uncle Ed, and my great aunt Grace. Also living with my great grandmother are her parents, Edwin and Mary Genter. Okay, so we got that.
I have a few questions, Steve.
Sure, go ahead.
What was the name of the Mormon file? Anne asks. Maybe, I'm not sure if she means the Mormon site.
Oh, I actually haven't given it yet, but I think what you're probably thinking of is familysearch.org, and that is the website that you would be able to search just like Ancestry and any other one.
Okay, and then I have a question from Sherry. She only uses Ancestry program. Is there a benefit to using other programs?
Well, let's see. The one biggest benefit that I know is, God forbid Ancestry ever got hacked, things could be troublemaking, be trouble. But when you have a program on your computer and your computer only, you control that information yourself. So that would be the biggest benefit that I would say. Otherwise, it's just fine using Ancestry if that's what you're using.
Okay, Tracy says you are not a nerd. And Bob says that maybe they meant GEDSOM. Or now Cynthia says speaker referred to GED-COM as a file format from the Mormons as well. Can you clarify that maybe, Steve?
Yes, it's called a GEDCOM file. So it will, whenever you create one of those files, it will, you name it, of course, whatever you name it, Smith Family Genealogy, and then it'll say Smith Family Genealogy, period, GED. So that's the file format, and that's how it's named or listed. I hope that answers the question. But the whole file name is called a GEDCOM file. Okay. Alrighty, so we're back to Grace. So she says that she's born in Washington, D.C., and then born in 1897. So the Thanksgiving after she died, in between that time, I wrote the Social Security Department and got the applications for Social Security. That's tough. And for all of my grandparents and my great-grandmother. So when everybody was there at Thanksgiving at our house, and it was mostly my mom's side of the family, we called her Nanny. So I go, hey everybody, where did Nanny say that she was always born? And everybody said, Washington D.C. And it was like this big chorus of an answer. But let's go see what she actually put on her application. So there is the birth date, about 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. She wrote November 25th, 1896. There we go. And if you go over to the right, she says Albany, New York. So she wrote it 4 years before she gave that information to the census taker. So we got her, but she wasn't around for me to celebrate. Not that I would have done that, but it was just one of those funny things that, we finally confirmed something. And that's another thing that you're going to do when you have faulty family stories. They are notoriously bad for being partially correct, not completely correct. And I know it's her because the signature down at the bottom, she had a very distinctive G when she signed her name, and that's it. And everybody confirmed that as well. So yeah, be aware of faulty family stories. They may be wonderful, but you still need to confirm them. Oops. Right.
Another question coming in.
Sure, go ahead.
Alfonso asks, what are your tips to navigate through faulty family stories?
One thing that you can do is, if that person is who started the story, if that person's still alive, maybe talk to them as nicely as you can to get some better perspective. If there are other relatives that know about the story, you know, maybe get that information. In my case here, it was a matter of just finding the documentation to back up what was actually correct. You may need that depending on what the story is. But you know, for instance, you know, somebody says, "Oh yeah, I'm related to such and such a person," but the tips to proving that is to find the paper chain, you know, that person belongs to your family. I would try to talk to as many people also in your family as possible to see if there are different stories, different interpretations, which might lead you to finding that paper trail. Okay. All right. Now that you have things written down, you have it on paper, you have it in your genealogy program, whichever one you use. You look at it and you ask what do you want to know or what do you need to know, and you look at those blanks in your family tree. And just like I said, to try to confirm stories, talk to your relatives. They might have missing information. You know, I've been in contact with second and third cousins of my family, and you know, we've kind of shared stories and go, okay, well, that's correct. Maybe that's not as correct as we thought. So that's one way to do that. Look for more resources that might have information. Things are coming up online all the time. Different places like churches, alumni associations, social clubs are digitizing items as well. And then as far as family records, new items may appear. Perhaps a favorite aunt of yours passes away and she knew that you were interested in genealogy, so she gave you a bunch of photos and family documents for you to add to your big repertoire of information. So that is a wonderful way that you can fill in those blanks. And then getting more information, you know, we talked about asking relatives about their memories of growing up, not only to confirm stories, but you know, what was it like for them to grow up in the 1960s, for instance. Don't just get the facts and dates, get the stories. That's what we're looking for. You know, ask why, how, and what questions, or who. My mother has dementia, and before it got really bad, after my father passed away, I started talking to my mom about things that related to the family. And one particular conversation we had was how my parents met. I knew the general outline of the story. So when we were driving home one day from a get together with some friends, I started asking her, you know, I kind of know the general information about how you and Dad met, you know, what do you remember about it? You know, so she started going through things. They were both members of Masonic organizations, and they were set up on a blind date for some sort of mixer with my dad's group. And one thing that I didn't know until that time was that my dad didn't call her until a year later for another date. And in the meantime, I have no idea, and I don't think that my mother went out with anybody else. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, it was, she gets a call from this guy who she met a year ago, and, you know, it's like, well, you know, what took you so long, kind of thing. So as soon as I dropped her off, and as soon as I got home, I started writing that stuff down, because as good as your memory might be, you need to write this stuff down, because it just reinforces what what you've heard, and also just helps with your files, adding that stuff. Alrighty, here we are. We've gotten to the internet. We always tell people use as many free sites as you can before you spend any money. And we'll get to those in a moment. So one way that you can use sites that are free is to go to a library. They will have library editions of a lot of those pay sites, including Ancestry. And you can go to a family history center, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. But of course, Ancestry is the big elephant in the room. They are the pay site, and they are the most popular. In addition to having a family tree, that is yours. I should add to what Sherry was asking earlier. When it's on Ancestry, it's still yours. Nobody can change anything except you. But then obviously you might want something on your own computer. But of course you can look at documents. You have incredible choice of databases depending on what you're looking for. If you're looking for immigration information, birth, death, and marriage information. Let's see, other family trees that distant relatives might be collecting as well. So if you're looking for your great-great-grandfather and they happen to be related to another person who has that information on their tree, and if it's a public tree, you can look at that information, compare it, and see if that matches what you have with your family information to further bolster your research. And that's one of the things that you want to do. One interesting thing is I can usually tell when somebody is just copying my information. That's up to them if they want to. I haven't confirmed everything on Ancestry, so you're not going to be looking at looking at my sources. I usually have that on my own computer, but again, let them do more research to find that out for themselves. Now, FamilySearch.org may be that other website that the other person had a question on, and that specifically was created by the LDS Church. All they want from you, though, is an account. So it's a free account. You don't have to be a member of the church to have an account. And even though they have your information, they will not send anybody to your house. So if you were maybe a little wary of that, they don't do that unless you were specifically, unless you asked, and unless you were interested in checking out what the church has to offer. But Family Search often has better records available. Maybe that's a better term, better records available than Ancestry. Because the folks at Family Search are scanning things out of the archives in Salt Lake City as quickly as they can. And they have a partnership with Ancestry that they'll make their stuff available to people who are on Ancestry. So very often what you'll see on Ancestry is, you need to look at FamilySearch.org for the original document. So you go to Family Search, and there's a link there, and you just go and find the document. Google and Facebook are two other online places that you can look at. Google is the search engine, of course, and what you want to do if you're looking for an ancestor, maybe put as much information as possible, but you always want to put it in quotes. Because if you have a relative, let's say, Bill Smith, and he was born in 1920 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and if you don't put that in quotes, you're going to get millions and millions of records with the name Bill in it, the name Smith, the date 1920, and Plymouth, Massachusetts. And it's not going to be what you're looking for. So you don't need to go through millions of records just to find your Bill Smith. Always put whatever terms you're searching in quotes. Facebook is more of a help page. There are many different genealogy pages. I belong to one, and it's usually just a share site where people say, oh, I need help deciphering this document. Can anybody read that name? Sometimes they're not familiar with old medical terms. So they ask people for some hints on that. We also now have, of course, specific topic websites, whether that's if you're part of an ethnic group or a church, one of the church faith or something like that. For instance, for African American genealogy researchers, there is a website, and I do have a list of websites, again, that I can make available, and I can just email those things to you. Also, if you're Jewish, there is a Jewish genealogy website. And I picked those out specifically because at certain times in the past, Jewish and African American research stopped at certain times. You know, with Jewish ancestry, it kind of stopped at the Holocaust. But as more and more documents are being found and digitized, they are being found as, you know, before World War II. And the same thing with African American research. That usually stopped, of course, the big fear, it stopped at the Civil War. But what I've seen lately are more state records, even in the South, and that have, you know, information about families who are were freed slave families, and they this is all before 1860. So those things are available as well. One thing that you'll never see, though, is this button. Click here for your complete, error-free, properly cited family genealogy. You know, you don't just turn on Ancestry and put in a name and everything's there. This is part of the reason why you research. This is part of the reason why you confirm that you have the correct information, because you want to be as accurate as possible. And some people are sloppy. You know, like those people who just grab things off of other trees, you know, thinking that we've all done the work. You know, it's up to you if you make that private or public, but just be aware people will say, okay, oh, that guy did the work. You know, but it's not going to happen, you know, automatically. So speaking of these local resources, the family history centers that are close to us at the museum are in Covina. And the one in Covina is off the 10 freeway at the Grand Avenue exit. And I just did a California thing. I called it the 10 instead of Interstate 10. And the one in Hacienda Heights is about 5 miles southwest of us here at the museum. All you need to do, though, if you are out of state or out of the Southern California area, is go to lds.org, the Mormon website, and they have a direct link that you can click to find your local family history center. All you need to do is click on that link and either enter your address or your zip code and let that do the searching for you. We always recommend, too, that you call and ask them their hours. Not every family history center has 9 to 5 hours. Some are only open a few days a week, depending on, you know, how busy they are. And I've not heard of any that need appointments, but you might want to ask that as well, just in case. Regional archives as well, if you would live next to or near a National Archives Center, you can join that and go research there. You do need an appointment because they will ask you what you want to look at, and they will pull that information if they have it. Historical societies, local ones, will have some information, usually in the context of the city, but if your family lived in a part of the country for a long, long time, there may be substantial information such as newspaper articles, stuff like that. County libraries often have genealogy sections. Registrar's offices in different counties. This is where vital records are kept, the birth records, death records, marriage licenses, and so forth. You don't need to get a certified copy for genealogy because that can really start to you know, make a dent into your pocketbook. So you want to get copies. And you know, unless you were needed certified copies, you know, you're trying to maybe get into a genealogy relative group, such as, you know, Daughters of the American Revolution. You know, you're going to need official documentation. But other than that, you don't need to spend the money. And you can join a genealogy society. I do belong to one, and many of those folks have been even doing genealogy longer than me. And they, you know, we just share information and, you know, learn different skills at our monthly meetings. We haven't had a monthly meeting since February, so we've just been, you know, touching base online.
Okay, Steve, I have some questions and comments for you.
Okay, sure.
All right, Tracy first wants to share that specific topic websites do work. She found info on her great-grandmother that way and was able to talk with her dance students. So awesome.
Awesome. Great.
Cynthia asks, has the LDS site started restricting availability of records? Seems like last time she checked, she couldn't access Mexican church records, but she might have been having a user error.
Okay, a couple things come to mind. There are some records that only LDS members can access. So if you know someone who is a member of a church, maybe they can log into their profile and find that information for you. And I don't know if that covers Mexican records. It really is baffling that you weren't able to find or access some of those records. The only other thing that I can think of possibly is maybe they didn't have the actual photograph of that record. Maybe they just had an index, which is a listing. Or if you were not able to access any records at all, I don't know. I would definitely write to them and find out what's going on, maybe try again. When you look at the homepage on Family Search, it'll have on the top line, it'll have search, and it'll ask you where you want to go. You can also click on the map that's right underneath there. I think it'll pop up in yellow depending on where you want to search. So if you click on Mexico on the map, it should bring up certain records. The only other thing that I can think of is those records might not exist that you're looking for. Those records are only good as what's available. That doesn't mean they don't exist also, but they don't exist maybe on Family Search yet. So try those in case, try those again to see if you can get a better result. And I would definitely, if you don't, I would definitely send them an email and maybe find out, hey, what am I doing wrong? They can probably walk you through that.
Okay, Mike says the difference in Ancestry and Family Search is often the index. While the source data is the same, the indexes were created independently. Typos cause lots of differences. Free sites are good, but sometimes you need multiple pay sites.
Yes, definitely. For instance, if you have an index, no, I take that back. Let's military records. Okay, up until this year, for instance, World War I and World War II draft registrations were available on Ancestry, and you can get those really easily on Ancestry. Some of them are still available, but for the most part now, Ancestry bought out the company that was that had military records. It's called Fold3. It is a separate website. It is a separate charge, but that's where you find more of a majority now of the draft registrations. So yes, it sometimes takes multiple sites. Now, you brought up a good point though about the index. Indexes are basically lists of, for instance, marriages. Okay, you will have on one column the bride's name in alphabetical order by last name. And then you'll have the groom's name in the second column, the date of marriage, and then maybe a reference to the certificate number that's in the archives, or even if it's in a book form, you'll have the book, the page number, that kind of thing. So yeah, indexes are not proof though that somebody got married in that sense, or somebody was born. You would need some other information to back up that index. So yeah, I'm sorry, the person's name was it Robert?
I believe it was Mike. Let me just
Mike, I'm sorry, Mike. Yeah. So Mike is right. Yeah, the indexes can be faulty, and you still need to look at other websites to confirm that information.
Okay, Monica asks, will these resources help with Mexican ancestry?
Ancestry.com might classify Mexico as the worldwide part of the subscription. You may need to purchase the international version, where you get both domestic United States information and worldwide information. On Family Search, that's just, they have everything. You can get Russian information, Asian information, depending on, where your family is from. So they are a lot more accessible as far as international records, but Ancestry, you do have to buy that separate subscription. And then other websites, I don't know. There are other websites like Ancestry that probably do have international records. I don't know if you have to pay extra for that.
Okay, and I have one last question that I'm going to actually generalize a bit here from a Galaxy user. What does it mean when someone has a trace amount of blood in their ancestry? For example, 1/64th.
So 1/64th of a particular ancestry, it means, let's see, I want to say it's at least 6 generations back, wherever you, on the pedigree chart, wherever you, the last generation, and it has 64 relatives there. One of those people has that particular bloodline. Let's say whether it's Cherokee or Irish or something like that. So in that case, you're looking at that particular result as how you are related to that person. When you get into more DNA information, you're going to find a lot more of different types of connections. They're called a centimorgan, and I don't want to get into huge detail about that. But the larger the number of that particular trait that you have, means the closer the connection, the family member. So, for instance, you're going to have the most of these centimorgans compared to your parents and your siblings. But the 1/64th is the generation. You go back 5 or 6 generations, whatever it is. Now it's probably maybe more so like 7 and 8, and you have that 64 relatives on that particular generation. One of those people has that particular bloodline.
Okay, is there a site we can contact for Catholic Church records?
I can't remember off the top of my head if there is a specific website for all Catholic records, but I know that they keep very good ones. Your best bet is to find the archdiocese of that particular church. They tend to have those records in a particular spot. A lot of times the individual churches will have it too. And what you'll usually find are actually books that have been scanned online, and you'll just flip through the pages of that particular document. I would definitely start with the archdiocese first, and maybe plug in looking for ancestry information, and hopefully it'll at least direct you to the right place. Some other churches, I know my church, the United Methodist Church, has conference archives, and that's usually a geographical area that covers. So that might have some church records too. So again, just contact that particular church and ask if they where their archives are. Do I need to come in, or are they online somewhere? But for Catholics, I would start with the archdiocese.
Okay, and I just wanted to comment that, Anne, I see your questions, and I will ask them at the end as far as materials go. Thank you.
All right, so we are done with this one here. All right, so we've already talked that your entire tree won't be online. Not all old sources are digitized. So that means you might need a road trip. Oh, well, that's great. I would love to take a road trip. We have a docent here who is really into genealogy, and she and her husband have taken many road trips just for genealogy purposes. and that would be fantastic and a lot of fun. You know, visit your ancestors' hometowns. You might search courthouses, churches, local historical groups, that kind of thing. Sometimes a county historical society is combined with their genealogy files, and you may be, you know, driving down the road in the middle of somewhere in Illinois, for instance, and you might see this, you know, big building that has, you know, historical artifacts of the region, plus genealogy, and even, you know, newspaper information. Cemeteries, it's both a hit and a miss. More of the larger cemeteries do have pretty good information online on their website, and some of them also have other companies, third-party companies, which manage that information. But it's great when the cemeteries have you know, burial information, you know, how much it costs, and you know, you get a little more biographical information as well, such as the date of burial and that kind of thing. One of my favorite artifacts that I have in my collection is of my great-grandfather. After he died, he was buried at the family cemetery in Cincinnati, and it cost his wife $35. This is in the 1920s, and the upkeep was only $5. You know, of course, when I put that up on the screen at our on-site workshop, you know, people actually groan knowing how much, you know, funerals are nowadays. But you know, that's probably a lot of money too, but not nearly as enough as, or not nearly as much as what's going on now. But the information is still there. You just have to look for it there. Alrighty, that is all I have to share as far as my presentation. Before we get any more questions and sign off, I'd like to invite you to some of our upcoming virtual events. And the one coming up on June 7th is a continuation of our Female Justice series. We have done that for a couple of years now, and especially this year with the centennial of women's suffrage. On the 13th, my colleague Michelle, again, is going to have a paper preservation workshop. So you can watch the photo preservation workshop and tune into this one if you're interested. And, you know, she'll explain to you what the best way to keep paper safe. That includes probably newsprint as well. Of course, you know, that's usually on cheaper paper and can be much more fragile, but she'll go over that stuff. We do have a fiction book club that Isis is one of the moderators for. If you're interested, just go to the website and our upcoming events and you can get in touch with them. And then the last two in June are really exciting. I'm really looking forward to watching that. You know, Ragtime, Jazz, and Swing is great. And then Black Leaders of Leisure in the American West. That is a very fascinating sounding topic. So I'm looking forward to that. If you would like to contact us here at the museum, there's our website. Follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and WordPress is where our blogs are. And I do have, a half a dozen or so blogs on genealogy. So if you're interested in looking that up, you can find that fairly easily and get some extra tips there. And I may have even some more information on finding maiden names in that one too. And then if you have any direct questions that you'd love to ask me, I would love to help you with anything. So there's my my email address, and I will get it. So please don't worry about that, even though we're working at home. So I thank you very much for joining me today. I hope I've given you some good tips and shared some fun stories about my research. And thank you again so much. And if there are any more questions, I'd love to answer them for you.
Yes, so now is a really good time for additional questions if you've got them. Anything you've been holding back on and you want to ask now is great. I do have 2 questions from Anne, who was wondering if there's any material she can get, or can she get a copy of the PowerPoint? So how would you like to go about answering that?
Okay, so I think you cut out for a second. Say it again.
I'm sorry. Anne is interested in getting materials or a copy of the PowerPoint. So for viewers who want copies of things, how would they go about getting that?
Just email me and I can do that. It might be easier for me to, as far as the PowerPoint goes, create a PDF. So you can, it's not as large of a file, with all of the photographs and everything, but you'll still have all of the information on there. So yeah, that would be just fine. And just please request that when you email me. I do have about 6 pages of information that I think that beginners should have. So if you would like those, again, please email me, and that's just an easy email to all of that.
Okay, and I just want to point out a few things while we're waiting for more questions to come in. After this program is completed, if you are on Zoom, you will receive a survey about how our webinar went. We do appreciate it greatly if you can take the time to fill it out, because we always want to improve. But if you are watching from Facebook, I actually have put the link to the survey in the Facebook comments. So if you would like to fill it out, we would also greatly appreciate that. I've got some comments. Tracy says, awesome info. Thanks, Steve. Super helpful.
Thank
Sherry
you.
says, excellent. And Sherry also has a question of where can you find the family group sheets?
Anywhere online. Go to, well, you can just Google family group sheets and you can probably find them. I know definitely Ancestry. If you have an account, you can download them off of Ancestry, and the same thing with Family Search. But there are many places that have that, and like I said before, pick the ones that mostly fit your needs. If you do grab one from Family Search, they will have some specific room on there for some ceremonies that the LDS Church performs, and they log on their family group sheets. Obviously, if you have that one, that's fine. If you're not Mormon, you just don't fill that particular section out. But again, whatever's best fits your needs on those.
Okay, Mike asks, do you know when the 1950 census data will be available?
Yes, 2022. It's 72 years after the census is taken.
And Cynthia asks, how do I go about finding divorce records for the LA area circa 1945?
If you have an Ancestry account, you can go specifically to marriage records, and I don't know what the time frame is on those types of records. Sometimes there are long periods of time where birth records won't be available, in case people are still alive, for privacy reasons. You can try that on Ancestry, and there are plenty of databases out there with California records. Again, maybe Google divorce records California and see what comes up, and you might be able to find a website that has that information. And you can definitely check the offering, because obviously if you get something that's from the 1880s, that's not going to serve your need. So you want to be as specific as you can. FamilySearch.org also has what are called wiki pages, and if you have an account there on that website, you can also go to the California wiki page. Just pull up California records, and it'll give you an option on that, and it will have links to numerous sources that are available, but maybe not in the same type of format. And what I mean by that is that they will some of them will be in index form, but some of them will be unindexed copies of the actual documents. The bummer on that is that you have to search through all of the documents. So again, you try to look and see if you can narrow it down by year, and then try to find that particular document you're looking for.
Okay, Bob asks, is ancestors illiteracy a roadblock to going deeper into a family tree?
That's an interesting question. My great grandfather that I showed you, Luther. I do have his World War I registration, and his signature was an X, and it was witnessed by the person, taking the information on the draft registration. The only thing that I can think of where the illiteracy might be an issue is if you are looking for actual family information. Sometimes there's family information that have been digitized online. I mean, I found a lot of things that, for some other projects that I've worked on where those items are available. But again, those are only as good as the people putting them online. But that might be the only thing that would prevent somebody from putting anything up, is if they are illiterate and, just wouldn't want to write things down and to share it. So I suppose it could interfere.
Galaxy says, great webinar. And Mike says, thanks. And I'm going to give you guys 5 more seconds to ask any final questions. Otherwise, we will wrap up. And I want to remind you all that if you missed part of this webinar, you will be able to find it in about a week on YouTube. Our website has a link to our recorded programs archive. And you can also find there other workshops and other lectures that have been happening online through Zoom. So you can watch all of our programming, even if you missed it the first time around. Monica says thanks. Javina, I hope I pronounced that right, also says thanks.
Thank you so much.
Sherry.
It's been a pleasure sharing this with you, and I hope that when you start your journey, it's as rewarding to you as it is to me. It's something. One of the things I didn't say, and this will be the last thing, is that when you do have those brick walls, when we talked about the roadblocks, when you plow through that, you think that you can do anything in the world. It is such a satisfying feeling. Maybe you've cracked that code, or you've found something to back up that story, and just to learn a little bit more about your family. So thanks to you again, everybody, and it's been a pleasure.
We have some more thanks for everyone. Thank you guys for attending, and we hope to see you at future programming. Everyone have a lovely day.